Alright, so first thing we're going to do is I want you to create a folder called React-tutorial. This is going to be the folder that we work from and put all of our code in. Inside of mine, I have a subfolder called CSV, and inside that is an anime CSV file that I provided in the description, so you guys can go ahead and download that. This file is going to have all of the CSV data that we're going to upload into MySql. However, there is one problem with that. We don't want to add this genre column into the anime table. That's something we're going to do later on. And this name column right here has some commas in it. So when we go to import it into MySql, it's not going to parse correctly in the database, and it's going to create extra columns, and it's going to mess everything up. It's going to offset by however many columns are in that name column right here in our CSV. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a npm package called Papa Parse, and what Papa Parse is going to let us do is it's going to let us convert that CSV file. It's going to read through, do all the fancy logic for us, and we're going to be able to extract the information from that CSV and do some data manipulation to it, and then convert it back into a nicely formatted string that we can then create a CSV file out of. So let's get started with that. If you want to read the documentation, it's right here at papaparse.com. So the first thing we're going to do is open up our terminal. We're going to navigate to our project directory, and I'm going to do code dot to open up Visual Studio Code. Okay, perfect. So you can see that the React tutorial is right here on the left, along with the CSV file. Next thing we're going to do is do npm init, because right now this is just a blank project, and it's not set up to be a npm or a node project. So npm init is going to do that for us and create a package.json file so we can install Papa Parse and the other dependencies that we use throughout the tutorial. So this is going to prompt for some stuff. Just press enter every single time. We don't need to worry about any of this. And perfect. We have our package.json file, and you can see that there are no dependencies here. So next step we're going to do is npm install Papa Parse so we can make use of that CSV parser. Alright, great. It's looking good so far. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a file, and this is going to be the index.js file that we use in order to parse through that anime CSV file and get the data out of it that we want. Alright, so what we're going to do first is import Papa Parse. Next thing we're going to do is import the file system, and this is a library that is supplied by JavaScript. It's already there natively, so we don't really need to import anything there. It comes with JavaScript. So the first thing we're going to do is create a variable for the file path, and right here we have it at anime.csv. So in the CSV folder, and it's called anime.csv. Next thing we're going to do is actually read in the file with that file system package provided by JavaScript, or library, excuse me. And that's we're going to pass in two arguments to that, the anime file path as well as a encoding, which is UTF-8. UTF-8 is the default character set. It just tells the file system what encoding to use whenever it reads in all those characters that it gets from that file. And UTF-8 is just pretty standard. It's going to be the same one that we use for MySql, so we're going to use UTF-8 right here. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to create an object for all of the rows that we extract and read in from with the Papa Parse package. So let's do that. We're now going to use Papa Parse and use the parse method, and that takes in two arguments, which is the actual anime file, and then an object with some settings to tell Papa Parse how to parse through this. So header is going to be the first key that we set for this object, and we're going to set that to true, because if we look at the anime CSV file, we can see that there's headers. So we want to say, hey, we have some headers right here, and when you parse through every single row in this CSV, set all of the different parts of this row to their respective headers. So for instance, this first number is going to be set to anime ID. This is going to essentially be an object, and we're going to set all the different keys of that object to the different headers that we have in the first line. The next thing we're going to do is say skip empty line, set that to true. If there's anything empty if there's a line that doesn't have anything in it, then we want to skip through that. We don't want to put that into our final CSV file. And then we're going to declare the complete attribute, and this is going to be set to a function. And the function is going to be, it's basically just going to supply, it's going to set the anime rows object to all of the different pieces that we get back from that results variable. So anime rows.data is going to be set to the data that we get back from Papa Parse. The errors attribute is going to be set to whatever errors we get back. And then meta is some miscellaneous information that we don't really need to concern ourselves with. It's just going to give us some extra context into what was going on and probably some information about the file, not exactly sure. So the only thing that we need to concern ourselves with is this anime rows.data. This results.data piece right here is going to be it's going to be an array of objects, and each element, each object in that array is going to correspond to each row in this CSV file. Okay, and then each object is going to be made up of attributes that correspond to all of these headers. So right here, this number is going to be anime ID. This string right here is going to be name. We're not going to take out genre, so it's not going to have this in here, but we are going to take out movie, which is going to be of the attribute type. All right, perfect. So actually, if you run this just right now, then you're going to see that this anime rows.data has all of our rows in it. So let's just do that. Let's open back up our terminal. It's a good place just to check out what's going on. So we're going to do node index.js. And as you can see here, this is an array. We have the closing bracket right here at the end. There's 12,194 more items than what was printed out on the console. And you can see that each row corresponds to an object that has everything set to it very nicely, okay? So we have the episodes, genre, with all the headers that we sent in. Alright, so next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to do something with that data. So we're going to declare an array. It's going to be called anime array, and it's going to iterate through all of the rows that we got out from oh, wow. It's going to iterate through all of the rows that we got back from Papa Parse. So we're going to take in the row as the argument, and we're going to destructure all of the information that we need out of it. So it's going to be name, anime ID, type, episodes, rating, members. So we're going to destructure that out of the row. And then we're actually going to change the name a little bit. We're going to call this variable edited name. And we're just going to use the replace function in order to structure a regex that is going to look for all of the commas within that name and then replace it with empty space. And the reason that we're doing this is because, again, when we go to save this file and then import it into MySql, if there's any extra commas, it's going to mess up all of the way in which we add the data to the database, because the columns are delimited by commas, and then if you have extra commas in it, then it's going to be like, oh, okay, so this was the end of the name column, now we're going to put what was ever to the right of that comma into the next column. So for instance, if Kimi no Wa had a comma right here, this part would be the name column, and then it'd say, oh, okay, this is the comma, so now we know that a new column is set, or a new column is being set, and then it would put na wa period into the genre column and just mess everything up. So we don't want to do that. We just want to make sure that we account for that situation. Alright, the last thing we're going to do is we're going to return an object through each iteration of this mapped function. So we're going to set name to edited name, and then everything else is going to be exactly the same. Alright, great. Now, next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to get the data using Papa unparse as a string, so we can actually write that to a file. So what we did is we got an array of objects, and then we're going to use Papa unparse to parse through all of those objects and convert it into a string that we can then write with the file system. So next thing we're going to do is file system.write file. We're going to pass in 3 arguments. We're going to do the file path to the new file that we create. So I'm going to write that right here. It's going to be called, let's call it anime table. The second argument is going to be the actual data, so a string for all the data that we're going to write to that file. And then we are going to take an error callback as the third argument. So if anything goes wrong, we're going to output that error. And if not, we're going to log anime table successfully saved. Perfect. So let's go back to our console. We're going to do node index.js, see if everything gets according to plan. Oh, it did not, so I made a little typo. Let's copy and paste this. It doesn't have any idea what that variable is, so it threw an error. And do node index.js again. And it says anime table successfully saved. Perfect. So let's open up anime table.csv and see what we got. Alright, so it's going to look basically exactly the same as this, except you'll notice that we don't have the genre column. So there's no genre column. And if you look at the name column, there's no more extra commas because of the replace function we used. That's looking great. The last thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to be adding to this file quite a bit. So it makes sense to convert this into its own function that we can reuse over and over again. So that's going to be the last piece that we do. So we're going to define our own function. It's going to be called create file. It's going to take in a file path. It's going to take in some data. And then it's going to take in a message that we display if there are no errors. So we're going to do the exact same thing that we did up here. It's going to be file path. We're going to use the actual file system function. Take that error as a callback. If there's an error, throw that error. If not, then output the message. And then up here, we can actually remove this and just call that function ourselves. So let's rewrite this. Do anime data, and then the message is going to be anime table successfully saved. Alright, so we can delete this because now we're making use of a function that we wrote ourselves that we can have here in order to just get some shorter syntax right there. We have to write less code. So let's run this one more time. And it looks like everything is good to go still. So let's open up anime table.csv and you will see that it is still looking sharp. So that concludes the first step.